Hey everyone, I'm Seth Corbett-Davies and I'm a product owner and producer at Runaway Play. Today I'll be talking to you about production efficiency in mobile games that rely on live operations. More specifically, I'll dig down into the experiences our small team has had over the last 3 years, how we've managed to free up a lot of our development resource for other projects, and how this has actually increased the KPIs of our games. Cool. First of all, let me give you a bit more information about myself. I've spent 5 years in the industry, working at Runaway Play in Dunedin. We specialise in mobile games focusing on the wonders of the natural world. I'm a bit too tall, so I generally just exist as a floating head in team photos. I first started at Runaway as a programmer on 2 of our live titles. After a couple of years, I took over the role of product owner on those live titles, and now I work as the producer of all 5 of Runaway's live products, which are Flutter Butterfly Sanctuary, a game about raising and collecting real-life butterfly species in your own rainforest. Flutter Starlight, a magical nighttime spin-off from the original Flutter, featuring real-life moth species. Splash Ocean Sanctuary, a game about raising and releasing fish species to rebuild a tropical coral reef. Furistas Cat Cafe, a game where players run a bustling cat cafe by serving customers and pairing them with their favourite resident cats. And Bird B&B, a quirky augmented reality game about running a bed and breakfast just for birds. In this talk, I'll explain the history of development of these game titles first up, referred to internally as the legacy games. I'll detail the factors that forced us to rethink our development processes. I'll explain how we had to change our team structure to greatly improve our effectiveness. I'll show gameplay changes we made to reduce our development costs even further, while introducing new content to the vast majority of our players. And I'll detail the overwhelmingly positive impact this has had on our game and our game communities and our overall profitability. I'm going to use Flutter Butterfly Sanctuary, the oldest of our live games, as an example. As the flagship game of Runaway, Flutter has been going strong for over 8 years, with over 500 butterfly species for players to collect. Even 8 years on, it still has a daily player count of 10 to 15,000 and a passionate, dedicated fan base. Its collection gameplay, high retention, and long tail on player spending has a lot in common with our other titles, especially Starlight and Splash, and so it serves as a good case study for the improvements we've made across the portfolio. At its core, Flutter is a casual collection game based around players attracting, raising, and documenting butterfly species. Players raise each species through its life cycle, from egg to caterpillar to pupa and finally to butterfly. As players collect each species, they document images and facts about it in their Flutterpedia. Butterflies are grouped into themed sets, and collecting all the butterflies in a set earns players decorations they can use to personalize their environment. For context to the changes we've made, it's first important to explain the history of development in the legacy games. Traditionally, each game in the legacy portfolio was run by a distinct team. Each team would consist of a product owner, responsible for the overall direction of the game and its team, a developer, responsible for integrating new content events, fixing bugs and developing new features, an artist, responsible for producing art for new content events, game additions and App Store feature pitches, a researcher and a community manager who would share their time between all the games, and one member of the team, often the product owner, would act as the game's designer. For much of the life of the legacy games, the live ops and the development schedule have stayed very constant. Each month would run a 2-week-long special event in each of the games. These events would introduce a new set of butterflies for players to collect, and would almost always be themed around some real-world holiday and festival. And sticking to this routine helped the games thrive. The app and Play stores often picked up these games for featuring during these events. The biggest of these features would cause huge spikes in player numbers, and as a result would frequently bump our monthly revenue by anywhere from 5 to 50%. We had every reason to maintain this strategy, and so for years we did. However, it couldn't last forever. Gradually we started to see some of our key metrics slipping. Slowly the game started to get fewer and fewer features on the stores. Each feature we received was smaller, further from the last, and in less valuable territories. Not only that, but the baseline number of users we were seeing between these features had also started to wane. General maintenance of such old products was also causing us issues. At this stage, the technology of the games was over 7 years old, and over that time it had been worked on by 10 different developers. Each new SDK integration or update we needed to keep the games live was costing us more and more development resource to integrate into the Aging Codebase. The sheer amount of content we'd add to the game was also causing us slow load times and large space requirements, gradually chipping away at the user experience. So what did this all mean for us? In essence, the longer we stuck to the same development strategy, the less value our time brought to the game and to the business. At this point in time, half of Runaway's development and art resource was working on the live products, and as a company we couldn't afford to have all that resource going into games that didn't have the potential to grow our audience. We could be spending that time building new games. We needed to find ways to free up resource without sacrificing the game revenue that was keeping the whole company profitable. But where do you find extra development time when the whole team has full plates? We sat down and we discussed the situation we were in, looking at the workload breakdown of each team working on the live games. Where were we spending our time? Was there anything we could remove from the workload? On the face of it, it looked like all the work being done was essential. Spending less time on any one area would cause serious problems within the games, whether it be revenue lost from events, instability caused by technical debt, or opportunities lost because we couldn't be agile enough for our business needs. So what can we do? The thing was, each game was reacting to the exact same set of inputs, the same schedule of monthly builds and events, the same required SDK integrations and updates, and the same company business priorities. Maybe external factors meant our ad revenue was dropping, or the games needed new features to help with user acquisition. Or maybe a new device was released with a triangular screen, and the games now need to support that. Each team would take the common problem, develop a solution, and integrate it. This often meant the same chunk of work was being done in 5 different game teams by 5 different people, and that is where time could be saved. Most of the problems we were faced with required solutions that followed this timeline. As an example, let's say we needed to add an SDK for in-game player help. First, there's immersion into that task. A team member would be notified of the task and would have to shift their focus onto it. We found people changing from task to task only took a small amount of time, but added a little bit of mental load for each task they worked on. When multiple people within a team were frequently changing tasks, this became really noticeable. Next, the team member then needs time to investigate the task. What is the desired result of the task? What non-obvious factors need to be taken into account? And how can the task be completed in the best possible way? An example of this would be a developer digging through SDK documentation to find out how it's intended to work and how it can work with their codebase. Can you scroll down a bit? And lastly, there's integration, the time spent physically achieving the task. In this case, it would be writing the code, but for different tasks, it might be making art or planning out future events. Now, it's obvious that the integration makes up the bulk of the time spent on a task. Of course it does. But within a highly competent team, that time is not something we can easily streamline. However, the amount of overhead associated with the immersion and the investigation of the task is something that can't be overstated. Effectively, this timeline boils down to a person upskilling in a task, finishing the task, and then either totally throwing away their learnings or trying to communicate them the best they can with other people working on the same tasks. In either case, it's far from efficient. That overhead is something we do have control over. And as you can see, it's largely at an individual level. This is how the task structure often looked in the live game teams. As you can see, there's a whole heap of immersion and investigation overhead within the greater team. And that is what has been causing us days of lost time. So then we thought, what if one person followed through on every implementation of a task, regardless of what game team they were on? So something more like this. The same task could still be worked on simultaneously, but each team member didn't have to switch from task to task anywhere near as frequently. With this structure, everyone only needs to upskill on the task once, and then they can use their new expertise to integrate it everywhere it's needed. In fact, we found doing this meant each integration was better and faster than the last, as players became more familiar with the task itself. We referred to this new team structure based around shared resource as the legacy team. This new structure had a huge set of advantages for our production efficiency across the live game portfolio. Task investigation overhead was massively reduced. Fewer different tasks per team member helped reduce mental load and prevent burnout within our busy team. It meant all team members could get more experience across a wider range of products, and as a result upskill in new code bases, languages, or art styles. By implementing each task multiple times, people would become experts in it and would be the go-to person for the team for that task from then on. Having the team upskilled in all the games meant if something needed to be done quickly in one game, the whole team could pivot and get it done. And because all of the games ran on that monthly build cycle, the builds could be staggered in such a way that development on one game didn't block the release schedule of another. However, this change in structure didn't achieve everything we needed it to as a business. While it really helped our production efficiency in some ways, especially in areas like development and product ownership, it didn't have as much of an effect in others. By far the biggest area that still needed improvement was events. We were still running new content events every month in every game. These events were extremely resource intensive for the team. Let me take you through the development of an event using Flutter Butterfly Sanctuary as an example. First, the new events need to be researched for. Our researcher hunts for butterfly species from the real world we can include in the new event set, combing through thousands of potential species to find those that fit the game and fit the event theme. Each butterfly and decoration species is then thoroughly researched so we can make it as recognizable as possible in-game. Next, this research is passed over to the artists working on the event. Here is just some of the content one artist must produce for an event. The artists paint the 5 new butterflies and 4 new decorations as recognizably as possible to their real-world counterparts. They then research, concept, and draw special in-world theming to transform the forest throughout the event. They often create special skins for the characters in the game, and they create marketing assets like game icons, social posts, and store listing images. This can all take up to 2 weeks of an artist's time. Next, the art is passed over to the dev team for integration. Integration firstly involves a large amount of data entry for the developer, who fills out 10 separate sheets and pulls them all into the game. They then go through a lengthy art integration process involving various complicated scripts, file uploads, and painstaking manual tweaks. And lastly, they integrate some type of themed minigame to give the events an extra bit of variety each time. All of this can take up to 3 days of a developer's time. That's already a fair whack of time, and that's before even going into quality assurance, localization, and marketing resource. So as you can see, creating an event requires resource from at least 6 different people within the team. And this same process happens every month in 5 different games, some of which have even more involved event integrations. As time-consuming and as resource-intensive as these events are, they were absolutely essential to our company's well-being. With such highly engaged veteran players, having consistent events running in the game kept them happy and playing long after they'd fully completed the core experience. And crucially, these events monetized extremely well and were supporting the ongoing development costs of the whole company. Essentially, without these events, Runaway wouldn't be able to operate as it did and wouldn't be able to release any new games to grow the business. Streamlining how our team worked on tasks helped us massively, but it was clear that if we were to free up the amount of resource we needed, we'd have to change how we worked events. Somehow we had to find a way to have events that magically created, integrated, and ran themselves without any involvement from the team. Luckily, we had one big advantage. We'd been running events in Flutter every month for the past 5 years, and we had a big pile of old event content just waiting to see the light of day again. Each month we'd add an event with 5 new butterflies and 4 new decorations into the game. This content would be available for a limited time, and after that it would be locked away for all players except those who managed to collect it. Over 5 years, that's 300 butterflies and 240 decorations, 60 events worth. What if we could reuse that old content and repackage it into a new event for players to complete? Because the thing is, it's not really old content. That's not how mobile games work. Every single day, hundreds of people are picking up the game for the first time. They might stay for a day, they might stay for 5 years. The thing that's guaranteed is with such a large stock of past event content, every player won't have seen something before, and therefore to them it's new content. So we started to design a system that could utilize all of this past content. For the system to work as we needed it to from a production standpoint, we had to draw out some clear design requirements to follow. Firstly, the event's content must be personalised for the player. This keeps all levels of player engaged with the content, regardless of how long they've been playing the game for. Secondly, the events must make all possible past content available to collect, including any limited time sale or promotion rewards from years past. We had a large group of veteran players with almost fully complete collections, so ensuring that every player was given the most amount of content possible was hugely important in keeping them engaged. Thirdly, the event should remain a point of social engagement within the community. Some aspects of the event should remain consistent across different players' games. Players still need to have something to get excited about together, and they still need to have a place to share their progress with friends. And lastly, the event should be designed to entirely replace regular new content events if we need them to. This means that events must have enough replayability and reskinability to keep them interesting for players, even if there's one every week. But this also means events need to monetize well enough that the game's revenue will remain steady if we remove all regular new content events. We set out building the system in Flutter, figuring it would have the most to gain from it, with its large proportion of veteran players and huge amount of past event content. We were able to develop the system in the time spare after the regular monthly events and ongoing technical maintenance of the games. Overall, the development took us around 6 months from conception to the first event going live. This included 70% of a developer's time over 4 months, 25% of an artist's time over 2 months, 30% of a product owner and designer's time over 5 months, and 20% of a researcher and narrative designer's time over 4 months. To put that in context, over that period, almost the entire rest of the developer, researcher, and artist time was spent integrating, researching for, or creating art for regular events. Putting in this research now is hopefully going to future-proof the games for the rest of their lives on the store, and so it was absolutely worth the investment. And this was the result of that investment. Comparatively to regular events, these new events are quite short, at only 5 days long. This earned them the nickname mini-events. The player is first greeted by a new character in their forest, who is looking for help to grow their flower garden. The mini-event takes place entirely within this garden space. The player is given a bag of seeds every 2 hours, which they can open to receive a random assortment of seeds. The player plants the seeds, and over time they grow into a mature flower. Once the flower is fully grown, the player can harvest it for some amount of nectar, and this nectar acts as the XP for the event. As players collect it, it unlocks a series of personalised rewards. They can be mystery boxes of items, or butterfly eggs and decorations from past event species. So specifically, how did the mini-events fulfill our design requirements? Our first 2 design pillars were personalisation and maximised content. We wanted players to be given rewards that were new to them, and to be offered as many of these as possible over time. Here's an image of the rewards page from an event. Each event offers the player 3 main high-value rewards, as visible down the bottom of the page. First, there are always 2 butterfly species, picked from any of the past event sets a player hasn't seen before. Eggs for these species are scattered throughout the reward progression. And secondly, there is 1 extra special reward players receive if they complete the entire event within the limited time. In this case, it's the holly decoration down the bottom. The personalised rewards mean each event a player participates in has different but always desirable rewards. The reward system was built to pick from anything that had been added to the game at any point during the previous 5 years. Practically, this meant if we decided to run the mini-events back to back to back forever, a brand new player would still have 5 full years of content to collect before they ran out, which, considering the game's high long-term retention, was a hugely exciting thought. The next of our key design pillars was retaining the social engagement that kept our community thriving. This is where the timing of the event and the narrative within the event were so important. Despite the personalised rewards, we made sure these events still began and ended at the same time for all players. This meant we could still have a social post schedule throughout, and that players still had a space they could get excited about the event in. Secondly, each honeybee character would also present a narrative to the player over the course of the event. The hope was that this would encourage players to engage even more within our social pages during the event. The last of the event's social engagement strengths was the reward page. Having a player's reward progression visible on a single attractive page meant players could easily take screenshots of it and show off their event progress to friends, and we saw heaps of this during the first few events. Another design pillar we had to build the mini events around was replayability and longevity. I've already explained how the personalized rewards added a huge amount of potential gameplay for players, but this doesn't matter if the players get bored after only in an event or two and churn out. We had to keep mini events fresh enough that players would still be engaged if they were playing one every week. The way we achieve this ties back to the event's narrative design. We intentionally kept these narratives lightweight so that we could very easily add new characters or new stories if the players' interest had started to wane. We also built them to be standalone stories. This way, no matter what order our players are exposed to them in, they'll still get the full experience of each narrative. The reason these 2 points are so important was because the event storylines were built to be cycled through and repeated. In order to keep things as fresh as possible for all players, we were very particular about how we scheduled the mini-events as well. For example, we'd introduce our 3 different characters in 3 consecutive events, and then we'd introduce new narratives for those players in the following 3. This meant no matter when a player starts playing the game, they'd experience the largest amount of fresh content possible over their first 6 events. And finally, the last design requirement the mini-events had was high monetization. That was vital to our hopes to free up resource for new product development. The events had special seed bags and time-hurrying items players could purchase. They were built around players watching ads, and they had special shop packs that were catered to both high-paying and low-paying users. But by far the most important factor in delivering on this requirement was how we messaged value. Even the strongest monetization strategies don't result in high monetization unless the player is fully aware of what do they stand to gain from spending. And this value messaging is what we worked really hard on. When calculating the personalized rewards for the player, we took into account how desirable each reward was to that player specifically. We factored in things like the rarity of the butterfly species, the strength of its special ability, and whether the player would complete any sets if it collected it. The goal was to rank every butterfly in the game's desirability to that player specifically, and build the event rewards around that. To make sure the player was aware of this, we built UIs that clearly showed off the highest value rewards and specifically mentioned the reason the reward was high value. For example, you can see in this top image that the butterfly has extra messaging describing its ability to collect double the amount of pollen. So from an implementation standpoint, we'd fulfilled all of our design requirements for the mini-events. But did that carry over when it came time to launch? Did the new system have the result we needed it to? Yes, massively. As soon as the mini-events were announced, they received hugely positive reaction from the community. Players had been waiting years for an opportunity to collect some of the species they'd missed out on in years past, and they were hugely excited. We saw a good amount of re-engagement start to happen, with older players coming back to see what all the fuss was about, an estimated 2,000 players. And this positive reception only continued when the first of the events went live. Players fell in love with the bee characters, and loved discussing their narrative in the game. Throughout the event, players also shared their progress on the social pages, and encouraged others to do the same. From a community engagement standpoint, the events were a rousing success. And the KPIs, even better. At the point in time the mini-events were released, Flutter had a monthly average ARPDAU of around 8 cents. The average during the first mini-event more than doubled this, at 16.5 cents per player per day. In this first iteration, spending gradually ramped up during the event, peaking at a huge 26 cents on the last day. Seeing that players were mainly spending at the end of the event, we spent the next few events iterating on proactive purchasing opportunities for players at the start of the event. Doing so, we managed to raise the average ARPDAU during the event to a massive 19 cents, with 22 cent and 25 cent spikes at the start and end of their event respectively. The monetization of the events by far exceeded our expectations. Player counts also spiked with the release of the mini-events, thanks to some strong re-engagement and some feature support we received from the stores. The game's baseline DAU jumped from an average of 12,000 to an average of 14,000 over the following 6 months. We were over the moon with the KPIs we were seeing. If this positive reception continued, it would mean for sure that reducing the development and art resource in Flutter was not only viable, but would actually improve the quality and the performance of the game as a whole. And not just that, it meant that the same strategy could be used across the rest of the live portfolio to free up a massive amount of resource for new product development. So, how have the mini-events affected our production strategies since? While we were developing the events, we always knew the way we introduced them into the game was going to be a challenge. Our players were used to having new content events every month like clockwork. Even if they loved the mini events, they wouldn't appreciate having the regular events they'd become so accustomed to ripped out entirely. So we introduced the mini events slowly. Initially, we just ran one mini event between each of the regular events, but over time we slowly spaced out the regular events and ran more and more mini events in their place. As new players picked up the game, the proportion of players accustomed to a new content event every month began to shrink. And so as we slowly tipped the balance between events and mini events, we managed to keep the community happy throughout. Overall, this had a huge impact on the resource required to keep Flutter running. Over the course of the following year, we went from running one event a month to one event every 3 months. We kept an eye on retention to make sure this change wasn't hurting the game there, but retention was absolutely steady throughout. The mini events had allowed us to cut down on art resource by 2/3 and had taken huge chunks out of the workload of our developers and our researcher too. From this, we started to have legacy team members work on other parts of the business, including new product development. And this was just the effect of freed resource from one game. Seeing the success of Flutter, we immediately started building the mini events into Starlight. 4 months later, we were seeing the exact same overwhelmingly positive effects there. And we were able to free up even more legacy team resource for other parts of the business. As it stands right now, both Flutter and Starlight only run 3 new content events a year. But even so, they've frequently been breaking their all-time records for highest per-player monetization, and their review scores have been on a steady upward trajectory for the past 6 months. Looking to the future, the legacy team is now in the process of building a similar mini-event system in Splash, Ocean Sanctuary, and so shortly we'll have even more people freed up for other development. So, just to recap, over the past 3 years we've been on a mission to try to reduce our reliance on the live game resource that was keeping our company afloat. In the process, we've really had to adapt the way we run our live game teams, trying to eliminate the task overhead that was limiting us. By merging our 5 game teams together into one unified team, we were able to plan and complete tasks much more efficiently, while upskilling team members in the process. This resulted in some massive gains, but nothing compared to the huge difference after developing mini events. Over the space of a year, we were able to effectively halve the total resource required to run Flutter, and only a few months later would achieve the same result in Starlight. Practically, this has meant both our lead artist and our lead programmer for Flutter and Starlight have both moved on to development of our next in-development title, and thereby are investing their time in the future of Runaway's growth. Hope this case study has served as a useful insight into possible strategies for reducing development overhead within your live products, because as you can see, it has been overwhelmingly worth it for us at Runaway. Thank you. Our CEO and our narrative designer are both speaking on panels tomorrow, so make sure to check those out. And we're also hiring, so get in touch if you're interested in working. What was that, sorry? So we wouldn't reintroduce the butterflies to the player if they'd already seen them before, or if they'd already collected them at all. And so that, in conjunction with the fact that it had been so long since they'd last been seen, they had value higher than they did at the first stage. We really wanted to focus in on having it so that it wouldn't feel like the butterflies would just wrap back around. So you couldn't just wait and be like, I can't be bothered completing the event this time because I know I've only got a few left. We had things in there to be like, you'd have to get past this certain part of the event to get any of that butterfly, and otherwise it would come back. Things like that. It hasn't been too much of an issue just because of how quickly we've reduced having regular new content events, and because it's proper new content and things like butterflies that fans have chosen and things like that. There's still value in the new content as it comes out. But yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of what made this succeed was having an enormous backlog of stuff, storehouse.
Yeah.
For making a new game now, do you think you'd be able to apply some of these principles even though it was new?
Yeah, for sure. And like we massively have as well. The way Furistas Cat Cafe was built, it was with a lot more of this in mind. So as we created new content events, it was kind of like, okay, and there's our Easter event, and there's our World Cat Day event, and all that sort of stuff. And then when the next year came around, it would run the same things again. And like depending on the like retention of the game, like that could work totally fine, just like looping the same year. But yeah, it's definitely been something we've thought about as we've progressed forward.
Just have one more question on that here. Somebody's asked, did you identify the higher performing butterflies and prioritize those?
Yeah. So we gave a ranking. So all the butterflies have special abilities that allow players to do other things. The most powerful one is to be able to lay an egg from any other butterfly, which means you can have a butterfly that can lay eggs and then lay an egg of that butterfly, and it just spirals out of control. So we like ranked. It's like there's strength 1, strength 2, or strength 3, and then strength 4 of like super OP, like put massive value on this. And did that for all the butterflies, and then within the game, the rest of it just comes down from what the player has. So yeah, things like, I didn't have an example there, but yeah, if there's one butterfly left in the set, it'll say, you know, this will complete this set, and thereby unlock this extra decoration, sort of thing. Cool. So yeah, one more.
Wonderful presentation, very informative.
Thank you.
You presented sort of the old original way of working and what the different roles were doing, sort of the time that was using up doing new content updates. Can you give a bit of a description of the new process for these sort of mini events?
I mean, nothing particularly. We can just say one will run from this date to this date and sort of time them, you know, at a good cadence. And then from there, the game just picks it up. And it will still, like run social posts throughout and things, but from a developer standpoint, it's pretty much nothing. We queue up sort of 9 months at a time and just leave them. Cool, thank you.